Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Andrea Howard here from Carleton University, and I'm with Oscar. Oh shoot, I'm about to mess up your name. You introduce yourself,
Okay.
Oscar.
Yeah, this is Oscar Olvera from University of Washington.
And today we are going to talk a little bit about teaching statistics online. That is something that both of us have been doing with varying degrees of success, both in the past year, but also for a while now. I have taught some courses online in the past as well. So we thought we would talk a little bit about some pros and cons that we've encountered, especially during COVID-related online teaching. So Oscar, you had thought about basically some software issues that had both pros and cons. So what do you want to tell me about that?
So, I mean, as you were saying, we were all thirsting to this about a year ago. It's part of the whole thing. Nobody could escape it. And I think, when we discussed this previously, I told you I'm not really a fan. I'm really looking forward to the days where I can teach in person, but over time you figure out a few things and you realize that it's not as bad as things were. The one thing I remember, it just struck me right from the very first moment when I started teaching, the issues with helping people with software. Right, you have this. It used to be when you're in person, that I almost wanted to be able to pinpoint at people of this line of code has to change, or we need to move things around a little bit. But when you're doing particularly synchronous teaching on Zoom, it's okay, go down a few lines. Okay, you went back down too far. Move up another line. Move here, move there, which sort of just slows the whole process. In terms of how to make software teaching and evaluation more efficient, because at the end of the day, the type of materials that you and I teach, particularly stats, they're very hands-on, and I guess when you can't extend your virtual
hands, actually be hands-on. Yes. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I can remember in lots of in-person classes, literally walking behind students and kind of lurching over them to point at their screen. And one time somebody had typed a number 1 instead of a letter L, or the other way around, and that was
classic.
That was impossible to find unless you could make out the difference in the fonts. And yeah, so I feel the same way, that it's been difficult to do that virtually. I've been having people paste their code in the chat in Zoom and
that's what you do, right?
Yeah. It doesn't feel quite as good, and you can't tell if it's worked correctly because you can't watch their screen. So I think there's some folks that have figured out really good tools for this, but this seems to be a situation that's really benefiting people that know a lot about the available resources on the internet, about how we can teach digitally, who have some experience beforehand. So it hasn't been my favorite thing, and it is pretty unique to teaching statistics online, I think.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel anything software related stuff that's paper and pencil related, it's been a little bit of a challenge in terms of I realize now that just the physicality that comes into teaching sometimes of being able to express yourself with your hands, or circle things and connect them, which is I mean, you can do with virtual whiteboards right now, but it's when you sort of have to tailor these to each little square in your Zoom, things you just don't scale properly. It gets out of hand really quickly.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It is in some ways it's a little easier to do a software demo in class online than it is in a room where you're kind of relying on getting assigned to rooms that have the right technology set up. And I mean, at my campus, I've learned to ask for specific rooms or specific attributes. And there's 4 or 5 different things I need that'll limit me to about a half a dozen rooms on campus that are able to do data projectors on multiple screens, that have, the right kinds of connections, the right kinds of displays.
Exactly.
So that, but then even then you're still you're projecting your R window or your SAS window or whatever it is onto a screen that's a little bit blurry and not always that easy to follow for the students. So I think when they're seeing a voiceover on their laptop screen of you typing commands in, that is a little bit easier from a kind of both a teaching and a learning perspective. I can wave my mouse over what I'm talking about. I can comment on the fly. So I do feel that's been a bit of an advantage.
No, it's been like, I mean, when you mentioned that, and it took me a while to realize that, especially if you're teaching asynchronously, I feel it forces you to be very explicit in your steps, I think, right? Because otherwise you're going to have like a whole lineup of Zoom people coming in and say like, how did you do this? What did you do here? So I do sort of like appreciate the fact that we have to sort of like think a little bit more into how we're going to explain. We can't rely as much as in the heuristics that we usually do, maybe. And to a certain degree, and I mean, we can dig a bit deeper in the teaching part as well, but the aspect that you can, by this existing on video, students can replay the stuff that maybe they got confused. Like, okay, how did she do this? Or like, okay, like she started here, but then she jumped there. It's like, so I kind of feel like when you're doing it in person, particularly students, maybe they can ask once or twice. By the time, there's the third question, even though I have no issues, people ask like questions 10 times, I do realize there's sort of like an implicit, maybe social pressure of like, okay, you're stopping the class, we need to get moving. But like it's recorded to that level of detail that we were describing as a demo, then it's like, just, replay 15 times until I get it.
Yeah. And that kind of, so that was certainly my experience doing asynchronous teaching in the past, where I had to script out everything. Like I had to kind of for some code. I mean, you always want to have your software demos ready for class and you know what you're going to do, but having everything scripted out and being ready to talk about exactly why you're typing something in or why things are going in a certain order, that seems to be a little more urgent online. I've been teaching, have you been teaching asynchronously? Because I've been teaching synchronously this semester.
Synchronously all the way.
Yeah. And that I like the opportunity there to have people sort of just jump in with questions or jump in and be able to say, oh, my code's not doing what yours is doing. And to be able to get immediate feedback. And that's kind of what I was expecting, that there would be a lot of interaction, but like, so maybe under the heading of interpersonal, I feel like there's been way less of that kind of personal connection with the students and the ability to kind of read their expressions and figure out when they're stuck compared to what I'm used to in class. Has that been your experience?
No, it's just been that, I tend to sort of like consider teaching as, within the broader category of performance. There's a performance element into teaching, and this speaks a lot to me, and being able to use that has been curtailed a little bit, because all I have is this little black screen and like a blank background that doesn't really let me express the things the way they are. I mean, who knows, maybe after this, like we talk about, sort of like I become one of those influencers because you spend so much time on the camera that now you know how to modulate yourself in the camera. But like I always wanted to be able to project my own energy when it comes to teaching to my students, which is of course now curtailed, especially because let's be honest, not everybody who takes our classes is really that stoked about the content in our classes. So there's a lot of like, kind of like motivation or like, cracking jokes, trying to make things a bit more interactive, that has been limited a little bit by this medium that we're now sort of like forced to use.
I really enjoy making bad jokes in class, and when it's in person, and they kind of, they pretend to laugh at your jokes, and you can kind of build a bit of rapport in the classroom. But online, I have a number of students who are kind enough to keep their videos on for me, so I have somebody to look at while I'm teaching. But most people have their videos off, and often for very good reasons. So I don't know. I don't know how the jokes are landing, or the comments, or whether they're stuck, especially whether they're stuck. What points aren't getting passed because I can't read any body language, right? What are you supposed to do? Like, I can't force my way into people's homes, nor do I want to. And even for the people I can see, I can only see this much of them. And a lot of people's confusion is, full resolution, scrunched up faces, and changing postures, and looking down on your notes and up at the screen and down at your notes. There's just a lot of things you just don't see as easily when you're separated by that kind of distance, plus the time lag between when you say something and they hear it and then you see their reaction, right? So it's been difficult from that sense. I feel the lack of nonverbal cues is a huge limitation.
Yeah, no, and these, because I know there's a lot of research on these that for some reason people tend to ask fewer questions in sort of like technical classes, like stats, math, physics, that kind of thing, which is, I mean, like I sort of like get it. I always ask questions when I was an undergrad, like, I would never stop because I'm thinking like, I want to learn these things, but I also empathize, like, it doesn't seem to be the norm, which means that we get, like most professors, I think, eventually get quite good at being able to read the nonverbal cues, saying, okay, like, can I proceed? Like, even if, because, even if you ask for questions or like, some people have asked me, like, don't ask if anyone has any questions. Say, you guys, or ladies, everybody has questions, give them to me. I had never been able to just elicit that many questions from people, irrespective of which technique. So you get good at these nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
Which, it's, we're sort of like missing out right now. But, we kind of make do with what we have.
And it's, so, that's, for me, that's a big limitation. I don't know how much of a limitation it is on the student side. Certainly there's a huge accessibility advantage for people who are, have just in general more difficulty coming to campus or have more challenging schedules to deal with. And so the flexibility of being able to take the class online or to be able to watch the video later because they couldn't be in class for one reason or another. That's obviously a huge advantage. So, there's a trade-off everywhere. And I like some aspects of this, like, not having to walk 20 minutes to get to a classroom that's on the other side of campus, I guess. And
you get to teach in your PJs.
Let's see. I'll have sweatshirts on sometimes, and occasionally I'll feel the need to put on something that's business casual, but it hasn't been happening a lot.
Exactly. The habit is slowly eroding away, like at least on my end. But I do. So we had a conversation in a faculty meeting. When was it, like a few weeks ago, with something that like it resonated with me. We said like, okay, this is definitely an advantage that I had not considered, but like I realize it's helping a lot of students, which is like, I know that you're in psychology and in education, and it happens to be the case, particularly when you go into graduate school, that a lot of people who go into graduate school in education, colleges, faculties, and they already have jobs in schools, in school districts, as teachers, as principals and whatnot, which is why a lot of our classes happen in the evening. Oh, okay. So there's this fact of like, people having spending 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day, especially now with the pandemic, and then having to drive from your school to campus, sort of like basically switch hats from principal to student, like just refresh yourself, be ready. It's places a lot of demands on the time and effort of students that I didn't consider, which sort of like gets considerably reduced when people are like, I just need to get home, maybe take a quick shower, put on something comfortable, get myself some tea, just turn on the screen and, hopefully enjoy what's coming out of it. Which, when you are a working professional and you have to just, go to school on top of things, I can see why having the access of saying, I don't even have to drive there, I don't even have to deal with people. I just can, sit in front of the thing, turn off my camera and just pay as much attention as I can. Like, so it's definitely a pros and cons. Like I want to feel for people when this goes away, if it goes away, because now there's even talk, right, about like maybe the whole Zoom teaching, online teaching becoming a bit more permanent in terms of the way in which we do our day-to-day jobs. But at the end of the day, for quite a large group of people, it is an advantage, and I do want to recognize that.
And I don't really want to, make this about what I would prefer. I certainly, I feel energized in the classroom, in the physical classroom. I really like it. And I would really miss having the in-person experience. But if it's the case that the in-person experience is a significant disadvantage for like a healthy majority of students, then at some point you either have to let it go or you need to focus more on blended approaches. Like maybe we don't need to meet every week, right? Maybe we need to meet every other week or every third week for less time, and in between there are structured modules or the odd video supplement. Like I just finished making a video to kind of supplement an online class, right, where we had done something that didn't work out in class, and I made some mistakes in my math, and then I realized it during the class, and I said, I'll just do it later. I'll fix it for you guys later, and worked up a new video and posted that online. So that kind of thing was possible. So that's, maybe under our kind of third general category of
teaching is changing.
Things, what's possible in teaching. I feel like this whole experience has exposed a broader range of what teaching can look like. We had already started talking as a discipline, as an academic discipline of maybe lecturing in front of 20-year-olds for 3 hours is a dumb way to teach and a dumb way to learn. It's not, it's what people used to do. And we've been riding on that for a long time, because the people who are doing it now are the people for whom sitting in lectures for 3 hours worked the best, right? That worked for them. They got their grades along the way well enough to keep going, and then eventually take over from the people who were doing the teaching many years earlier. So we're the people that it worked for. And you have to recognize that when you're saying, well, if that's how I was taught, then it's good enough for you guys. But it's not really. And it's there's many reasons why just standing in front of a classroom and lecturing is not an ideal way to teach or to learn.
Like the case that I always make, because I know that we have, a reasonably good understanding for these. It's when you're teaching anything even remotely technical, the STEM type degrees, we have a very solid research of which time of the day, definitely not the evening, how many hours we're supposed to be teaching before, people just get into the weeds, or just get too tired. And if I remember correctly, it's something like no more than twice per week, hour and a half, somewhere before lunch, but after breakfast, so that the sweet spot is like Tuesdays and Thursdays, an hour and a half, let's say from 11 to 12:30 or 11 to 1. That's where your students seem to be at their maximum to be able to understand these things.
There's so many class times outside of that.
But that's the thing, though. These are prime hours, which means that very few people actually get the privilege of having these type of schedules to maximize their teaching. When I started teaching, my previous university in South Florida, I was teaching a 4-hour class on Wednesdays.
4?
That's 4 hours.
Why is it 4 hours? It's too long.
I asked, it's this is how we do it. This is how it's been.
Okay.
And it was ultimately frustrating, because you can see the students, particularly a few of them who were coming in from work. I could get maybe 2 hours of their attention on a good day. By the time we got to 2:20, 2:30, I could see people were just falling asleep, just looking around.
It's just too much. But
I do realize now that because of course the physical space becomes an issue, well, the digital space sort of gets rid of that problem. So if you want to get that sweet spot, it's okay, then you make your lectures at this time so that students can watch them when they feel they're at their prime when it comes to their attention. Maybe you have very night owly people, so midnight is the time where I actually flourish. You're I'm not gonna be touching it.
That's when you watch it. And I found the first year graduate statistics has historically always been a 3-hour lecture once a week in my department.
Oh.
And so, I hadn't really questioned that. And I liked, just being able to quarantine the teaching in one chunk per week. And I hadn't really heard from students in the past saying gee, I wish this was broken up into a couple of classes a week or whatever. But they always in person, they always preferred to have one just healthy break in the middle, right? 20 minutes. They could go get a coffee. They could even get lunch if it was that part of the day. But this year, it became very clear very early on that they needed 2 breaks. That was, it's too much, right? So, so that's been, I don't know if this is something that's been true for everybody, but we're delivering a lot of really technical content, right? We're asking them to do math problems on the fly. We're asking them to follow code. We're asking them to try and absorb a lot of technical stuff. And on Zoom, it is clearly harder to do that. it is clearly more tiring to do that. Yeah. So I switched to a 2-break schedule, and that has clearly been preferred.
Yeah, no, I've been working with, in that class, the 4-hour class, so like, if I need to teach these, like, I need to like 2 breaks, just because nobody can stay awake for that long. Mm-hmm. But I did come to realize that what I did was actually expand my breaks more for from 10 to 15 minutes, because I don't know if it happens to you that sometimes even when you're delivering the content, it's almost like when you're driving, on a highway and everything just looks the same. And then over time, it's almost like you sort of like doing things on road, and that's when accidents happen because people start falling asleep. I kind of feel like, because it doesn't really matter where I turn around, everything just looks the same, right? Like it just looks like this, and I noticed something like, wait, like I'm not making sense. Like I need to stop myself, sort of like gather my thoughts, and then like start again, because it's just being on this monologue where you get like no feedback. You don't really get to look around and say like, oh, such and such is the computer, this person's paying attention, make note of that person who like made a face when they, so it's just the computer and a whole bunch of like little screens or black squares. So I
had been in the habit in person of pausing and like not necessarily waiting for hands to go up, right? Pausing and asking, this student, Jessica, what do you think about this, right? And that gives an opportunity for somebody to say something without having to put their hand up, to potentially introduce a problem, and to just kind of, do a little bit of a recap. And I haven't really found a way to integrate that kind of thing into the classrooms. You don't know, you don't want to just put, the people whose videos are on the spot, and you don't know if the people whose videos are off are actually in a position to be able to be engaged at that moment. So that has been a bit of a loss, I would say. I think it goes along with the limitation of, interpersonally connecting and lack of cues.
Now, but I was saying, like, we like to, end things on a positive note.
Yeah. So there's definitely some positives to take home.
Exactly. So like, what do you say, like, has been your positive take home of this whole teaching online pandemic type experience?
Yeah. So I would say that the kind of influx of tools and new skills to learn has clearly been a positive take home. Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of things that I've learned about and explored and had done in an online setting that I hadn't bothered to think about before. And so, there's a lot of new skills to retain and to carry forward into an in-person classroom. So, for example, making good use of your learning management system for your class, and like feeling free to make supplemental videos to go along with your content and upload those, like being able to do a whiteboard demo on an iPad and record it and upload it and have that be a supplemental resource for students. I wouldn't have thought to do that before, right? I would have just thought, we'll just cover that in class. I'll leave a little bit of time at the beginning of the class and we'll just do an overview. And that can be valuable too, but actually giving students more multimedia resources to work with. I feel like I'm giving them more direction in terms of how they can do their own work, because out of necessity, I'm using a lot of online tools, right? We're using an online space to do the work. So where it hadn't really occurred to me to bring external resources into the classroom before, I think that is now at the top of my mind, and I'm going to continue to do that kind of thing when we move back into the classroom, at least in some capacity. That's what I'm voting for. What about you? Do you have a positive take-home message for us?
Yeah, no, it's so because I'm kind of new at the whole, professory thing. I feel like you always try to start from a position of like, okay, I'm no longer a student. I need to be able to have people, recognize me as a professor, and to a certain degree as somebody who has a certain degree of authority, because not that I'm gonna exert it crazily, but just to make sure things can progress smoothly. But it's been a bit of a crash course in empathy for me, in a sense that I very quickly, especially when the pandemic was at its worst last year, I just started thinking, why is this relevant? Why is my class content relevant to anything? like I'm having students who are getting sick. I'm having students whose parents are getting sick, and suddenly they become the primary breadwinners. I'm having people tell me like, I just lost my job. I don't even have enough money to finish this semester, this quarter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it just opened my eyes to the incredible needs that people had, and how much important it is for us professors to be flexible, to realize that, the business as usual is not going to be working it hasn't been working for a few months, and probably won't be working for a while. And so I kind of feel that the connection with students that I would assume professors develop over time, with respect to like, okay, let them get away with this, or like, what, there's too many things, or don't go around questioning, like, my parents are sick with COVID, here's a late assignment, instead of like, okay, show me the doctor's note. Yeah, your parents, because I've seen that. It's like, who cares? Just submit it late. That's fine. Like, I'll work something out with you. And yeah, it has been more work on my end to be able, because then you have to tailor solutions to a whole bunch of people when at first you had like one approach that would fit everybody. But I think we kind of owe that to our students.
Yeah,
and
I completely agree. And I can really remember that mindset of essentially at the early part of your career, confusing arbitrary rules and inflexibility with rigor, and feeling like these are the parameters of the course and it's up to you to like meet the bar. But it's all a bunch of nonsense, right? Like, it doesn't matter if they turned an assignment in a couple of days late. Did they do the work? Because that's what matters, right? And they probably had a reason. There's really not that many students, honest to goodness, who are just sort of routinely turning in work late because they don't want to, or they're trying to like get out of something, or because they're trying to kind of have more time than other students. Like, that's not really where it's coming from. So in my experience, there's no real advantage to those students for delaying and missing work. I mean, in the end, they're probably going to be doing more poorly anyway. I think there's a lot more to be gained from just being completely flexible with students. And I'm hoping that a lot of people have realized that over the course of this year. Right?
Who knows, right? Because you go on Reddit and realize what students are complaining about, and they say like, Jesus Christ, who are these people teaching these things? Because it's the lack of flexibility, or like just say like, well, I'm going to conduct my things as if it were business as usual. We're just like, this is going to pass, and I'm like, no, we can't do this anymore. Like, there is no business as usual. Number one.
Number two, business as usual from your perspective was probably bad in the first place, because again, like I said before, what worked for us when we were students were the old rules that were relatively arbitrary and inflexible, and we've carried that forward. But along the way, all the people that struggled with those arbitrary and inflexible rules were disproportionately dropping off whatever track it is that gets you into a position to be teaching at the post-secondary level. So remember, like, the people making these choices now are a very, very small subset of the people who responded well to rules from when we were younger. So it's not a good basis for making decisions. And the this is what we always have done approach is probably a bad reason to keep doing it.
It's not good enough. It's not good enough anymore.
So I think we can definitely say this year has been a proving ground for more empathetic approaches to teaching and learning. And I'm certainly hoping that's one of the biggest positives that we can take away.
No, that's what I say. Like, I mean, there weren't that many silver linings, but like, sort of like to, wrap on the positive note, like, here's hoping that, the difficult lessons that we've learned will actually transform themselves into like, more equitable teaching, like just using more resources to try to reach as many people as we can, and just, hopefully a net positive. Like, I know it's wishful thinking, but hey, keep a positive attitude. That's all
And one of the moms in my school group says, stay positive and test negative. So thanks for the chat.
There you go.
Oscar.
Perfect. Thank you.
See you all next time.
See you next time.